ఫస్ట్ క్లాస్ చెప్తాను, తర్వాత ఎవాల్యుయేట్ చేస్తాను కొంచెం. After explanation, let us evaluate. Once again, good evening, friends. Today's topic is measures taken for the development of tribals. In the measures taken, we are going to study constitutional measures, legislative measures, then administrative measures, that means different varieties of schemes or programs, and finally the role of NGOs. Role of NGOs. In our timetable under measures we have incorporated these topics. For your exam, generally from constitutional measures one question will definitely be asked, and from the legislative measures also one question will definitely be asked, and on the schemes they may or may not ask, it depends upon the news. And role of NGOs is also a potential question. It can be asked for 10 marks, it can be asked for 15 marks also. In the constitutional measures, we have general provisions. There are certain provisions to protect the tribal people and for the sake of development of tribal people. You can come across those constitutional provisions in our material and in polity textbooks also. But in our anthropology, most of the times they ask area-based provisions. Why? Because certain tribal people are concentrated in different parts of the country. Wherever the entire population is tribal population, there we recognize such areas as notified tribal areas. Wherever we recognized that there is significant amount of tribal population along with non-tribal population, that means if the tribals are more than 50%, then we can say that there the tribal population is significant. But of course, the process for declaration of a particular area as scheduled area is different. State government, the governor, president after consulting the governor declares a particular area as a scheduled area. But generally, state government gives recommendation to the governor, governor gives advice to president with respect to those areas where there is a significant amount of tribal population. When the tribal population is more than 50% of the entire population, generally with respect to such areas, we can come across declaration as scheduled areas. For our exam, on 5th schedule, questions will be asked. On the 6th schedule, questions will be asked. In your preparation, you must know what are the provisions that are there in the 5th schedule, what are the provisions that are there in the 6th schedule. And in the legislative provisions, with respect to tribals, total we have 4 laws. One is SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989, PISA Panchayat Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act 1996, then Forest Rights Act 2006. Apart from this, these are specific provisions with respect, specific laws with respect to tribals. Apart from that, we have one law, land acquisition law, land acquisition, resettlement and rehabilitation law. In that law, we have separate chapter for the sake of SCs and STs. Even though that is a general law with respect to land acquisition, in that law, in order to protect the weaker sections, especially SCs and STs, our policy makers incorporated certain special provisions. That's why Land Acquisition Act also you have to study. Land Acquisition, Resettlement and Rehabilitation Act 2013. You must prepare these laws. And for your exam on SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act, questions may or may not be asked. Most of the times, so far, not even a single question was asked. Most of the times in the entire tribal India, questions revolve around the tribal people, their rights and displacement. That's why questions will be asked either on PISA or on Forest Rights Act, and very rarely questions may be asked with respect to land acquisition. That law was enacted in the year 2013. Until then in India, the land acquisition was governed by 1894 Land Acquisition Act. that means colonial law. Based on colonial law in India, we acquired land. Until 2013, our policymakers did not bother about the land acquisition, especially the weaker sections, SCs, STs. They are prone to all varieties of exploitation. And that law was enacted in the year 2013. And to commemorate that law, especially our UPSC is more interested whenever a particular law attains 5 years of age, 10 years of age, like that. In 2018, one question was asked, distinguish Land Acquisition Act of 2013 and 1894 Land Acquisition Act. One question was asked. And but you must know what are the provisions that are there, especially for STs in this law. Special chapter for SCs and STs in this law. But most of the times questions will be asked from these two laws. Panchayat extension to scheduled areas. Here the purpose of that law is realization of grassroots participatory democracy in the tribal areas. And the Forest Rights Act is in order to correct historical injustice and to recognize the rights of the tribal people. We have recognized certain rights of the tribal people. Until then, their rights were not recognized. That's why we used to say that on the tribal people, lot of historical injustice was committed. To correct that historical injustice, this law was enacted. And as part of that correction, we have recognized certain rights of the tribal people. Most of the times questions will be asked from these two topics. You should not go to the exam without preparing these two laws. And here 5th schedule and 6th schedule, most of the times in the constitutional provisions, most of the times questions will be asked either from 5th schedule or 6th schedule. But within these two schedules, again preference will be given to 5th schedule. It was asked a number of times. That's why I gave that question. And with respect to schemes, every year you have to go through Ministry of Tribal Affairs website. What are the schemes that are there? You have to go through. And you have to go through statistics also. How many beneficiaries are there, and what is the literacy level, what is the employment level, what is the labor force participation rate, all those things you must know. So why? Because sometimes questions may be asked, what are the different varieties of programs that the government has been implementing in order to deal with unemployment or in order to deal with illiteracy, and what is the impact of those programs. Then you have to write comparatively, what are the literacy levels in 2014 or in 1950s, and what are the literacy level according to the recent annual report. Like that, whichever year you are going to write the exam, in that year you must go through annual report of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. You have to go through those statistics also. You can easily remember these schemes, you can write answer. But when the question is asked, the impact of those schemes, you must be in a position to explain comparatively. Before these schemes, this was the situation. After these schemes, this was the situation. Like that, you must explain. Okay. And role of NGOs, this is a potential question. That's why here, in my opinion, based on our experience, 5th schedule, 6th schedule, PISA Act, Forest Rights Act, and role of NGOs. These are very, very important topics for your exam. You know, in the entire tribal India, if you combine all the topics, the total number of questions are 18 long answer questions. Total number of questions are 18 questions. If you prepare those questions properly, tribal India will be under your control. Okay, now see. Now today I have given 5th schedule. 5th schedule direct probable question is there, and from 6th schedule also direct question can be asked. Sometimes questions may be asked like this. Is there any need to review constitutional framework with respect to administration of tribal areas? Discuss. Sometimes indirect questions may be asked. This is not my own question. This issue was highlighted by Kaka committee. It is not Zaza or Saksa. It is not so. It is Kaka committee. Kaka committee highlighted. It examined even the legislative framework, also constitutional framework, legislative framework, and it highlighted certain problems. With respect to 5th schedule provisions, it highlighted certain problems. With respect to 6th schedule provisions, it highlighted certain problems, and finally it gave its recommendations also. Questions can be asked in any manner. If they want to ask long answer questions, that to indirect questions, they may ask questions like this. Is there any need to review constitutional framework with respect to administration of tribal areas? Discuss. That is the question. Then you have to write, in the 5th schedule, these are the drawbacks. That's why there is a need to review constitutional framework. In the 6th schedule, in the 6th schedule provisions, these are the drawbacks. That's why there is a need to review the constitutional framework. Then you can give your recommendations. Not for each and every topic. Today's question is, I gave just 5th schedule, and here the examiner is expecting that those 5th schedule provisions, instead of writing 5th schedule provisions, you started writing criticism and measures to be taken, all those things. Your answer must be confined to that particular topic only. Why? Because this is a 10 marks question. If the question is asked on relevance of 5th schedule provisions, then you have to write drawbacks or criticism to the 5th schedule provisions, and you can mention 5th schedule provisions briefly. After that you can mention the drawbacks and you can suggest some measures also. Here my question is not on the relevance of 5th schedule. I want to test your knowledge with regard to constitutional framework that is there for the tribal areas. That's why in your answer, if you write the provisions that are there in the Lakshmikant polity textbook, that is sufficient. In your answer, now let us discuss today's question. Today's question is, just I mentioned 10 marks question. What is the 10 marks question? 5th schedule areas. 5th schedule areas are simply scheduled areas. 5th schedule, simply mentioned. In our constitution, in the 5th schedule, under Article 244 Clause 1, we have provided for separate pattern of administration with respect to scheduled areas, which is as follows. Then your answer must be, that is the introduction. And in your answer, 4 components must be there. Declaration, a declaration of scheduled areas, executive control over or executive authority over the scheduled areas, then Tribes Advisory Council, then special role of governor. You have to write your answer under these 4 subheads. Many students, they have a written answer, and I understood that you know the content, but the language that you have used is not acceptable. Here, whenever we are discussing about some constitutional provisions, we must use that constitutional language, legal language. Here is a declaration. The President is empowered to declare any area as scheduled area after consulting the governor of the state. Those terms must be there as such. The President is empowered. President can declare. For your understanding in the class, we may explain differently. But whenever you are writing exam, your answer must be in this manner. Those terms must be there with the proper formation of sentences. That's why here you have to write like this. The President is empowered to declare any area as scheduled area after consulting the governor of a state. And he can alter the boundaries. He can change the name, or he can change the area of a scheduled area. Over. Next one is executive control over the scheduled areas. State government has executive control over the scheduled areas, but the governor has special responsibility. He has to submit a report to the President annually or whenever he is required to do so. The center is empowered to issue directions to the state government with regard to exercise of executive authority over the scheduled areas. With respect to Tribes Advisory Council, in the states having scheduled areas, Tribes Advisory Councils have to be constituted to aid and advise the government with regard to welfare of the tribal people. Then if you want to write about the composition of Tribes Advisory Council, you can write. And role of the governor. With respect to administration of the scheduled areas, governor has a special role. He can issue regulation with respect to land allotment or transfer of the land or land distribution. He can issue a regulation to control money lending activities. He can issue a regulation specifying the non-applicability of any central or state law with respect to scheduled areas. He can issue a regulation repealing or modifying any central or state law. You have to write those points. Why? With respect to scheduled areas, the central and state laws are automatically applicable. Governor has to decide, governor has to review, and governor has to decide. But most of the times governors, they won't bother about those central laws, state laws. That's why that is one of the drawbacks as identified by Kaka committee. But with respect to notified tribal areas, 6 scheduled areas, it is not so. The central laws, state laws are not automatically applicable. Governor has to decide. If governor decides, then only they will become applicable. But in 5th scheduled areas, automatic application will be there. With regard to non-applicability or with regard to applicability with a modification will be decided by the governor. 5th schedule ఏరియాస్లో ఆటోమేటిక్గా సెంట్రల్ అండ్ స్టేట్ లాస్ కూడా అప్లికబుల్ ఉంటాయి. కాకపోతే వీటి వల్ల హామ్ జరుగుద్ది అనుకుంటే గవర్నర్ ఒక రెగ్యులేషన్ ఇష్యూ చేసి ఇది వీళ్ళకి అప్లై కాదు, లేకపోతే అప్లై అయినా మోడిఫికేషన్స్తో అప్లై అవుద్ది అని ఆయన ఒక రెగ్యులేషన్ ఇష్యూ చేయొచ్చు. అదే 6th షెడ్యూల్ ఏరియాస్ అయితే ఎట్లా ఉంటుంది, సెంట్రల్ స్టేట్ లాస్ ఏవైనా కూడా ఆ ఏరియాకి అప్లికబుల్ కాదు. ఒకవేళ మంచి వీళ్ళకి కూడా ఉపయోగపడుతుంది అనుకుంటే గవర్నర్ ఒక రెగ్యులేషన్ ఇష్యూ చేసి ఇవి వీళ్ళకి కూడా వర్తిస్తాయి అని చెప్పాలి. With respect to 5th schedule areas, there is automatic application. With respect to 6th schedule areas, there is no automatic application. Okay, we'll discuss those topics in the second round. In your answer, these points must be there. Here, the point that I want to stress here is, you have to confine your answer to the provisions. Second one is terminology. You have to use a proper terminology. Understanding is different, writing is different. This is about 5th schedule, 10 marks. If the question is asked for 10 marks, you have to write like this. And tomorrow we'll discuss tribal problems. And the tribal problems, anyway, here I think you might have studied all these provisions, welfare measures, all those things. Tomorrow you have to focus mainly on causes and consequences. Why? Because whenever you are going to tribal problems, then also you will come across measures taken by the government. That's why, in order to have simplified preparation, I gave first measures. And tomorrow, if you focus on causes and consequences, that will be sufficient. But try to understand causes and consequences. Measures, you know, constitutional measures, legislative measures, other schemes, you know. But you must know Kaka committee recommendations. Tomorrow, you have to focus on Kaka committee recommendations also. Okay. And that too, don't write Kaka committee recommendations for each and every topic. Relevancy is very, very important. If the question is asked accordingly, then you have to write. Otherwise, don't write. Even if you want to write, you can give passing reference of Kaka committee recommendations, 1 or 2 lines. But if they ask specifically, then you have to write answer. Say for example, discuss the causes for low literacy in tribals and suggest some measures to deal with the problem of low literacy in tribals. In that question it is specified, suggest some measures. Then you have to take some points from Kaka committee recommendations. Then you have to present those recommendations as your recommendations. That's it. Okay. Based on the study of a report, you must acquire some knowledge. Based on that knowledge, you have to give some recommendations. You need not to write all the recommendations of Kaka committee. Certain important recommendations. Okay. Now you can bring your answer sheets. In the exam, with respect to long answer questions, choice will be there. With respect to short answer questions, there is no concept of choice. First question is compulsory, 5th question is compulsory. In first question, 5 sub-questions will be there. In 5th question, 5 sub-questions will be there. That's why most of the times we focus on short answer questions, not to avoid work of evaluation. Don't think otherwise. Okay? మీ సక్సెస్ డిసైడ్ చేసే షార్ట్ ఆన్సర్సే. లాంగ్ ఆన్సర్ క్వశ్చన్ చాయిస్ ఉంటుంది కాబట్టి ఏదో ఒకటి రాస్తారు. షార్ట్ ఆన్సర్ క్వశ్చన్స్ ఎంత బాగా రాసి వస్తే మీకు అన్ని మార్క్స్ వస్తాయి. No. కాకపోతే గవర్నర్ డిసైడ్ చేస్తారు వద్దా లేకపోతే కావాలి సమ్ మోడిఫికేషన్. ఆటోమేటిక్ అప్లికేషన్ విల్ బి దేర్. Central state laws are automatically applicable. They apply. గవర్నర్ వచ్చి మధ్యలో చేపడతాడు అన్నట్టు. ఏంటంటే ఒక రెగ్యులేషన్స్ చేసి ఇది మా వాళ్ళకి సూట్ కాదు అంటే నాన్ అప్లికబిలిటీ, లేదు మా వాళ్ళకి ఉపయోగపడింది కాదు కొన్ని మాడిఫికేషన్స్ చేయాలంటే విత్ మోడిఫికేషన్స్. The rules and regulations direct. We can issue regulations for peace and good governance in the tribal areas. ఎందుకుంటూ ఉంటారు మోస్ట్లీ అని పెట్టావా అసలు అంటే 3/4 ఎస్టీఎంఎల్ఎస్ ఉండాలి. మిగిలిన 1/4 ఆఫీసర్స్ వస్తారు, ఎన్జిఓలు వస్తారు, అందరూ వస్తారు. కాకపోతే కాకర్ కమిటీ 1/4 కాదు హాఫ్ కావాలంటాడు. సెంటెన్స్ కరెక్ట్ ఏమో కానీ ఇవన్నీ ఫిఫ్త్ షెడ్యూల్ లేవు. అటానమస్ కౌన్సిల్ లేకుండా ట్రైబ్స్ అడ్వైజరీ కౌన్సిల్. ఇంకా ఫర్రు గిర్రు వాళ్ళ ఆలోచన ఏమో మనకొద్దు. ఇంకా అర్థమైంది కదా కాన్సెప్ట్. 8 minutes పెట్టాలా? స్టేట్ గవర్నమెంట్ గవర్నర్ కాదు, రైట్. స్టేట్ గవర్నమెంట్కే ఉంటుంది. అంటే గవర్నర్ స్పెషల్ రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ ఉంటుంది. ఇప్పుడు హైదరాబాద్లో షెడ్యూల్ చేసాను రేవంత్ రెడ్డి పవర్ ఉంటుంది. కాకపోతే గవర్నర్కి స్పెషల్ రెగ్యులేషన్స్ ఉంటాయి, స్పెషల్ రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ కూడా ఉంటుంది. ఏంటంటే రిపోర్ట్ సబ్మిట్ చేయాలి పైకి. ఆ రిపోర్ట్ని తీసుకుని మళ్ళీ సెంటర్ స్టేట్కి రికమెండేషన్ ఇస్తుంది. అంటే స్టేట్కి కూడా అన్కంట్రోల్డ్ అథారిటీ కాదు, కంట్రోల్డ్ అథారిటీ. గవర్నర్ రిపోర్ట్ని బేస్ చేసుకొని సెంటర్కి వెళ్తుంది, అంటే ప్రెసిడెంట్కి ఇస్తారు. సో ఆ రిపోర్ట్ని డిస్కస్ చేసుకున్న సెంటర్ స్టేట్ గవర్నమెంట్ డైరెక్షన్స్ ఇస్తుంది. అంటే స్టేట్కి ఉన్న అథారిటీ అన్లిమిటెడ్ అథారిటీ కాదు. ఒకవేళ సెంటర్ చెప్పిన స్టేట్ లేకపోతే ఏమవుతుంది, ఫెయిల్యూర్ ఆఫ్ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ మిషనరీ తీసి పక్కన పెట్టేసి ప్రెసిడెంట్ రూల్ పెట్టేసి. The government is empowered to issue regulations. ఏడు వస్తాయి, ఈ పాయింట్స్కి వస్తాయి. దీనివల్ల నీకు టైం కిల్ అవుతుంది. టైం కిల్ అయితే పక్క క్వశ్చన్స్ ఆన్సర్ చేయడం. నువ్వు ఎక్కడ కోచింగ్ తీసుకున్నావమ్మా? జనరల్గా అడుగుతున్నా అంతే. అదే ఎవరంటే సింగ్ కరెక్ట్. గవర్నెన్స్ ఈ రికమెండేషన్ దేని మీద ఇస్తారు? గవర్నెన్స్ మీద ఇస్తారు. ఓ రిఫర్డ్ బై గవర్నర్. టు ఎనీ ఇష్యూ రిఫర్డ్ బై గవర్నర్. కరెక్ట్. మనకు ఉన్నది 4 పాయింట్లే కదా, కాబట్టి ఈ రీజనబుల్. ఆర్టికల్ 244 డీల్స్ విత్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ ఆఫ్ షెడ్యూల్డ్ ఏరియాస్. బాగానే ఉంది. ప్రెసిడెంట్ డిక్లేర్స్ ఏ పర్టికులర్ ఏరియా షెడ్యూల్ ఏరియా బేస్డ్ ఆన్ దీస్ క్యారెక్టర్స్. ఇవి రకరకాల గవర్నమెంట్ రిపోర్ట్స్ ఉన్నాయి కాబట్టి ఇది మెన్షన్ చేయొచ్చు. రిలవెంట్ ఇంట్రడక్షన్. క్రిటిసిజం అని చెప్తా తర్వాత అడిగితే రాయాలి. Constitutional rule for considering, కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్లో అసలు రూల్స్ ఏంటి? కాన్స్టిట్యూషనే పెద్ద లా, ఫండమెంటల్ లా ఆఫ్ ది ల్యాండ్. అంటే టెర్మినాలజీ అట్లా వాడకూడదు. ఎవరిని ట్రైబల్ కమిటీస్ని వాళ్ళు ఎవరిని కన్సల్ట్ అవ్వడం? ప్రెసిడెంట్ ఎవరిని కన్సల్ట్ అవుతాడు? గవర్నర్ని కన్సల్ట్ అవుతాడు. స్టేట్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ గవర్నర్ పేరు నడుస్తుంది, కానీ డిఫాక్ట్ పవర్ చేస్తూ ఉంటుంది స్టేట్ కౌన్సిల్ ఆఫ్ మినిస్టర్స్. అంటే స్టేట్ గవర్నమెంట్ గవర్నర్ అడుగుతాడు. మళ్ళీ గవర్నర్ స్టేట్ కౌన్సిల్ ఆఫ్ మినిస్టర్స్ అంటే పీపుల్ రిప్రజెంటేటివ్ కదా, అల్టిమేట్గా పీపుల్స్ రిప్రజెంటేటివ్. అంటే ది విల్ ఆఫ్ ది పీపుల్ ఈజ్ గోయింగ్ టు బి రిప్రజెంటేటివ్. మనకు ఒక సిస్టమ్ పెట్టినారంట. యూనియన్ ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్ ఎక్స్టెన్సివ్. యూనియన్ ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్ డైరెక్ట్ కంట్రోల్ ఉండదు, స్టేట్ గవర్నమెంట్గా ఉంటుంది. యూనియన్ స్టేట్కి రికమెండేషన్స్ అట్లా చేయి ఇట్లా చేయి, అంతేగాని యూనియన్కి డైరెక్ట్ పవర్ ఉండదు. అప్లికబిలిటీ కాదు, ఆటోమేటిక్గా అప్లై అయిపోతాయి సెంట్రల్ లాస్ స్టేట్ లాస్. కాకపోతే వాటి వల్ల హామ్ జరుగుతుందంటే నాన్ అప్లికబిలిటీ కానీ అప్లికబిలిటీకి మోడిఫికేషన్స్ కానీ గవర్నర్ డిసైడ్ చేస్తారు. అన్నిటికీ సాఫ్ట్ కాపీ పెట్టేయడం కష్టమమ్మా, చూద్దాం. సాఫ్ట్ కాపీ ఇస్తే అది స్ప్రెడ్ అయిపోతుంది. అమ్మాయి దగ్గర మెటీరియల్ ఉంది కదా, అడిగి జెరాక్స్ తెచ్చుకో.